This is my home now. Get out of here. I own every single penny that used to be yours. Have you ever had a moment where someone with power tried to make you feel small? Where a few seconds of someone's cruelty left a mark that lasted for months? This is the story of one man who faced that humiliation, not with a shout, but with a silence so powerful it brought an entire courtroom to a standstill. This is how the quietest man in town planned the sweetest revenge, without ever raising his voice. Stay until the very end to see how it all unfolds. If this story of standing up against injustice resonated with you, then show your support by hitting that subscribe button and ringing the bell. It helps this channel grow and bring you more powerful real-life stories like this one. Now, I have a question for you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know your city name in the comments below. The sun beat down on the dusty road, making the air shimmer with heat. A lone car, an old but well-kept sedan, moved steadily along the tarmac. Inside, Marcus Jones kept his hands at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, a habit from his father who always told him a black man driving a good car had to be twice as careful. He was thinking about the cold, sweet tea waiting in his refrigerator and the comfortable silence of his own home after a long day's work. The town of Cedar Creek's welcome sign, faded and peeling, passed by his window. He was almost home. The flash of red and blue in his rearview mirror was a sudden, unwelcome splash of color in the hazy afternoon. A cold knot tightened in his stomach, an old familiar feeling. He checked his speedometer. He was going 5 miles below the limit. He signaled carefully and pulled onto the gravel shoulder, the stones crunching under his tires. He rolled down his window, the blast of hot air doing little to cool the sudden sweat on his brow. He placed his hands back on the wheel, in clear view, and waited. The sheriff's boots made slow, heavy sounds on the gravel as he approached. Marcus could see the man's reflection in his side mirror, a large man in a tan uniform, his face shadowed by the wide brim of his hat. The sheriff took his time, his presence a deliberate show of authority. He finally stopped at the window, leaning down slightly to peer inside. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, scanned the interior of the car, then landed on Marcus. "Afternoon," the sheriff said, his voice a low drawl that held no warmth. "Good afternoon, officer," Marcus replied, his own voice even and polite. "License and registration." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Marcus moved slowly, telling the sheriff every move he was about to make. "My wallet is in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it now." He handed over the documents. The sheriff took them without a word, his fingers brushing against Marcus's. The man didn't even look at them. He just held them and stared. "Were you headed in such a hurry, boy?" the sheriff asked, his eyes narrowing. "I was just going home, sir." "Not in any hurry. This your car?" the sheriff asked, though the registration he held in his hand clearly stated it was. "Yes, sir, it is." The sheriff gave a slow, humorless smile. "A nice car like this for a man like you? You sure about that? You ain't borrowed it from someone?" The implication hung in the air, heavy and ugly. Marcus felt a hot flush of anger, but kept his face a calm, neutral mask. "No, sir. I bought it 3 years ago. It's paid for." The sheriff hummed, a non-committal sound deep in his throat. He finally glanced down at the license. "Marcus Jones." He said the name as if he were tasting something unpleasant. "You know why I stopped you, Marcus?" "No, sir, I do not." "Your tail light's out." The sheriff's tone was flat, final. Marcus knew it wasn't true. He had checked his lights just that morning, a ritual as ingrained as checking his oil. But he said nothing. Arguing was a door that led to a darker room, and he had no intention of opening it. The sheriff handed back the license, but held onto the registration. "I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the vehicle for me." The request, though softly spoken, felt like a physical blow. "Step out? May I ask why, officer?" "Just step out of the car, son. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." The friendly tone was gone, replaced by a cold edge. The son and the boy were not terms of endearment. They were tools to remind him of his place. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door, stepping out onto the hot gravel. The sheriff took a step back, his hand resting casually on the butt of his holstered pistol. The sun felt hotter now, more oppressive. Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the car for me. Spread your feet. Marcus complied, the metal of the car roof burning his palms. He stared at the patterns in the peeling paint of his own car, listening to the sounds of the sheriff's methodical pat-down. The hands were impersonal, professional, but the humiliation was a live wire, sparking through him. Cars occasionally passed by on the road, slowing down just enough for the occupants to get a good look before speeding away. After what felt like an eternity, the sheriff stepped back. "All right, you can turn around." Marcus turned, his body tense. The sheriff was looking at him, that same empty smile back on his face. He held up the registration. "You know, I could run you in. Driving with a broken tail light is a traffic violation. But I'm a reasonable man." He paused, letting the words hang. "I think I'll just let you off with a warning this time. Consider this your lucky day. But you get that light fixed, you hear? I don't want to see you driving around like this again." He handed the registration back. Marcus took it, his fingers trembling with a rage he dared not show. He simply nodded. The sheriff tipped his hat. "You have a good day now, Marcus." He turned and walked back to his cruiser, his steps slow and confident. He never ran the license. He never wrote a warning. The tail light was never broken. It had never been about the traffic stop. Marcus stood there for a long moment, watching the police car pull away, its tires spitting gravel. He got back in his own car, his hands shaking so badly he had to clutch the steering wheel to steady them. He looked into his rearview mirror. Both tail lights glowed a bright, healthy red. He sat there in the stifling heat, the taste of powerlessness bitter in his mouth. But as he sat there, the cold, simmering anger began to solidify into something else. Something calm, something patient, something deliberate. He started the car and pulled back onto the road, driving with an even greater care than before. But his mind was no longer on the sweet tea in his fridge. It was on the small, almost invisible camera mounted on his dashboard, its tiny green light glowing, having recorded everything. The revenge would not be loud or violent. It would be quiet. It would be legal. And it would be so very, very sweet. The silence in Marcus's car was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer the peaceful quiet of a man content after a day's work. It was a thick, heavy blanket of humiliation and cold fury. He drove the rest of the way home with a robotic precision, his mind replaying the sheriff's words on a cruel, endless loop. "A man like you. Borrowed it from someone?" Each phrase was a tiny cut, and by the time he pulled into his driveway, he was bleeding inside. His small house, usually a sanctuary of order and calm, felt different. The walls seemed closer, the air stiller. He went through the motions. Hanging his keys on the hook by the door, towing off his shoes, placing his wallet on the small table. But his movements were stiff, haunted. He walked to the kitchen, but ignored the sweet tea. Instead, he went straight to his desk, a neat, organized space in the corner of his living room. His hands were finally steady as he carefully disconnected the small dashboard camera from its mount. The device was cool and impersonal in his palm. He inserted the memory card into his computer. The video file appeared on the screen. He did not want to watch it. The thought of reliving those minutes made his stomach turn. But he had to. He had to know what the camera had seen, what it had heard. He took a deep breath and double-clicked the icon. There was his dashboard, the road ahead, the faded welcome sign. His own soft humming from earlier, a tune he now couldn't even remember. Then, the flash of red and blue reflected in the rearview mirror. On screen, he saw his own hands tighten on the wheel. He heard his own window whirring down. The audio was crystal clear. He listened to the entire exchange. The sheriff's drawl, dripping with false courtesy. The question about the car. The flat, lying statement about the taillight. The demand for him to exit the vehicle. The sound of his own voice, so carefully controlled, polite to a man who deserved no politeness. The video showed it all from a low, wide angle. His compliance, the pat-down, the sheriff's hand resting on his gun throughout the entire encounter. It showed the sheriff's face, his expressions of bored contempt, clear as day. It captured the final, mocking warning and the cruiser driving away. It showed Marcus, standing alone on the shoulder for a long moment, a statue of defeat before getting back into his car. He watched it once. Then he watched it again, his anger cooling and hardening into something else, a cold, clear purpose. This was not just an insult. This was evidence. He made 3 copies of the file, one on his computer's hard drive, one on a separate external drive he kept in a fireproof box, and one he uploaded to a private, encrypted cloud storage account he rarely used. He was a meticulous man, a man who believed in backups. He would not let this disappear. The question was what to do with it. Going to the local police was a joke. The sheriff was the local police. The mayor was the sheriff's brother-in-law. The system in Cedar Creek was a closed loop designed to protect its own. A complaint from him would be laughed out of the room. If it was even acknowledged at all, it would only paint a bigger target on his back. He thought about his options late into the night, lying awake in the dark. He could post it online, send it to a news station, let the court of public opinion have its day. But that felt messy, unpredictable. It could explode, or it could vanish without a trace in the endless noise of the internet. He wanted something more precise. He wanted a reckoning that was official, legal, and undeniable. He wanted the system that the sheriff represented to be the very thing that condemned him. The answer came to him in the clear light of the next morning. He remembered a name, mentioned in a newspaper article he'd read months ago about a civil rights case in a neighboring county. Eleanor Vance, a lawyer. The article had called her a pit bull in a pantsuit, a woman who had built a career on taking on lost causes against powerful people and, against all odds, sometimes winning. He found her firm's website. Her picture showed a woman in her 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a firm, unsmiling mouth. She looked like she didn't suffer fools. He drafted an email. It was brief and factual. He stated what had happened, when, and who was involved. He did not use emotional language. He simply wrote that he had a complete audio and video recording of the entire incident and was seeking legal counsel. He attached a short, 30-second clip from the video, just the part where the sheriff questioned whether he'd stolen his own car. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. He expected to wait days for a reply, if he got one at all. To his shock, his phone rang just 2 hours later. The number had a city area code. Mr. Jones? This is Eleanor Vance. Her voice was not what he expected. It was calm, low, and carried the weight of absolute authority. There was no hesitation in it. Yes, speaking, Marcus said, his own voice slightly tight. I received your email. I've seen the clip. She paused, and he could almost hear her thinking. I need to see the entire recording. Can you send it to me through a secure link? I can. Good. Do that. Then, I would like you to come to my office tomorrow. Can you do that? Yes. I can. 9 a.m. She said, and it was not a question. This is exactly the kind of case I look for, Mr. Jones. What was done to you is illegal. It was a violation of your Fourth Amendment rights. It was a demonstration of pure, unadulterated racial bias. And we're going to do something about it. There was a fire in her quiet words that ignited something in him. The feeling of powerlessness began to recede, replaced by a flicker of grim hope. The next morning, he drove to the city. Eleanor Vance's office was in a modest building, but inside it was all efficiency and quiet purpose. Her office had walls lined with law books and framed degrees. She rose to shake his hand, her grip firm and brief. She did not offer small talk. She had already watched the full video, multiple times. Sheriff Roy Dobbs, she said, her tone flat. A charming piece of work. He's been a stain on that county for 15 years. But he's careful. He's powerful. And people are afraid of him. Nobody has ever had proof like this. She turned her computer monitor so he could see it. The video was paused on the sheriff's face. What do you want to see happen here, Marcus? She asked, using his first name for the first time. Be specific. Marcus didn't hesitate. He had thought of nothing else. I want an answer for it. Not in the newspaper. Not online. In a court of law. I want him to sit on the stand and have to explain that. He pointed at the screen. I want it official. I want it on the record. A slow, cold smile touched Eleanor Vance's lips. It was the first expression he'd seen on her face that wasn't completely neutral. Good, she said. That's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to sue him. Personally, and in his official capacity. We're going to sue for violation of your civil rights, for unlawful detention, for emotional distress. We are going to drag him and the entire Cedar Creek Sheriff's Department into federal court." She leaned forward, her elbows on her desk, her hands steepled. "But understand something, Marcus. It will be hard. They will fight dirty. They will try to dig up anything they can on you. They will try to intimidate you. They will offer you a quiet, private settlement to make this go away. They will want you to take money in exchange for your silence and for the destruction of that video." Marcus looked at the paused image of Sheriff Dobbs on the screen. He remembered the heat of the car roof, the gravel under his feet, the feeling of those eyes on him. He looked back at Eleanor Vance. "I don't want their money," he said, his voice low but firm. "I want my day in court." Eleanor Vance nodded, a look of deep satisfaction in her eyes. "Then let's get to work." The battle had been declared, not with a shout, but with a quiet conversation in a sunlit office. The first move had been made. The months that followed were a quiet storm of preparation. The lawsuit, filed in federal court, was a stone dropped into the still pond of Cedar Creek, and the ripples spread fast and wide. The local paper ran a small, cautious article, but everyone knew. The gossip in the grocery store aisles grew hushed when Marcus walked by. He felt the stares, some curious, some openly hostile. He kept his head high and his routine the same. He went to work, he came home, he tended his small garden. But he was always aware of the undercurrent of tension. Sheriff Dobbs, for his part, played the part of the wounded public servant. He was seen around town, his expression grim, shaking hands with folks, a man unfairly burdened by a troublemaker. Eleanor Vance's office became a second home. They met for long hours, going over every second of the video, every word that was spoken. She prepared him for the deposition, a dry, legal procedure where the other side's lawyers would try to poke holes in his story. "They will try to get under your skin," Eleanor warned him, her voice calm and steady. "They will imply you were looking for a fight. They will suggest you were disrespectful. They will look for any inconsistency, no matter how small. Your job is to be a stone. Answer the question that is asked, truthfully, and nothing more. Do not volunteer information. Do not get angry. The video is our star witness. You just have to be the calm, reasonable man that you are in that video." The deposition was held in a sterile conference room. The lawyers for the county and for Sheriff Dobbs were two sharp-faced men in expensive suits. They tried everything Eleanor had predicted. They asked why he was driving so slowly. They asked if he had a problem with authority. They dwelled on his polite use of "sir," suggesting it was sarcastic. "Isn't it true, Mr. Jones, that you have a history of antagonizing law enforcement?" one of them asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "No, it is not true," Marcus replied, his voice even. He followed Eleanor's advice. He was a stone. They had nothing on him. His record was spotless. His tax returns were orderly. His life was a model of quiet, responsible citizenship. Their attempts to paint him as a radical or a troublemaker fell flat against the sheer, boring normality of his existence. They were frustrated. They could see the video evidence sitting on the table between them, a silent bomb waiting to go off. They knew their case was weak. They made a settlement offer. It was a significant amount of money. "They're scared," Eleanor told him afterward, a glint of triumph in her eyes. "They want this to go away. The offer is good, Marcus. You could take it, walk away, and never have to think about Roy Dobbs again." Marcus looked out the window of her office at the city below. He thought about the heat on the road, the feeling of the gravel, the casual cruelty in the sheriff's voice. The money was tempting. It was security. It was a new car, a paid-off mortgage. But it was also silence. It was an agreement that what happened to him had a price, and that price was his willingness to never speak of it again. "No," he said, turning back to her. "We go to court." Eleanor nodded, a slow, satisfied smile spreading across her face. "I was hoping you'd say that." The day of the trial arrived with a sky the color of iron. The federal courthouse was a grand, imposing building of stone and glass, a world away from the dusty streets of Cedar Creek. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of old wood and polish. Reporters lingered in the hallways, but it was a quiet, respectful crowd. This was a federal court, not a circus. Marcus wore his best suit, a dark, conservative cut. He sat beside Eleanor at the plaintiff's table. She was a portrait of focused intensity, her notes arranged in perfect order. At the other table sat Sheriff Roy Dobbs, looking larger than life in his full uniform, his hat placed neatly on the table before him. He looked confident, almost bored, as if this were a minor inconvenience. His lawyers whispered to him, their expressions serious. The jury was selected, a mix of men and women from across the district, their faces unreadable. The judge was an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. The courtroom was utterly silent as the bailiff announced the case. Eleanor Vance stood up for her opening statement. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked slowly to the jury box and simply began to talk. She described a man driving home from work. She described the flash of lights, the sinking feeling of dread. She promised the jury they would see and hear for themselves what happened next. "This case is not complicated," she said, her voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. "It is about a badge being used as a weapon. It is about a man being humiliated not for what he did, but for who he is. You will see a law enforcement officer lie. You will see him fabricate a reason to detain a citizen. You will see him treat an innocent man like a criminal. And after you have seen it, you will be asked to hold him accountable." The defense lawyer's opening was a study in deflection. He talked about the difficult job of law enforcement. He talked about split-second decisions made for public safety. He suggested that Marcus's reaction, his very politeness, was a sign of guilt. "You will see," the lawyer said, "that Sheriff Dobbs was doing his job, a job we all rely on to keep us safe." Then it was time for Marcus to testify. He took the oath, his hand on the Bible, and sat in the witness stand. He felt every eye in the room on him. He saw Sheriff Dobbs staring at him, a cold, flat look in his pale eyes. Eleanor guided him gently through his story. He spoke about his day, his drive, the stop. He described his feelings, the fear, the desire to comply, the humiliation. He was calm. He was factual. He was, as Eleanor had instructed, a stone. Then, the defense lawyer stood for cross-examination. He was slick, his smile not reaching his eyes. He tried to goad Marcus, to find a crack in his calm exterior. "Isn't it true, Mr. Jones, that you have a deep-seated resentment toward law enforcement?" he asked, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "No, sir," Marcus answered. "You weren't angry when Sheriff Dobbs stopped you. I was confused, and then I was cautious." "Cautious? Or were you hostile?" "Your use of the word, sir. You were being sarcastic, weren't you? Trying to provoke the sheriff." Marcus looked directly at the lawyer, and then he let his gaze drift to the jury. "I was taught to be respectful to everyone," he said, his voice soft but firm, "especially to people who have power over you." The lawyer blinked, thrown off by the simple, honest answer. He tried a few more angles, but Marcus's calmness was a wall he could not breach. Finally, frustrated, the lawyer sat down. Eleanor stood up again. "Your Honor," she said, her voice resonating in the quiet room, "the plaintiff would like to enter Exhibit A into evidence." The judge nodded. A large screen was lowered at the front of the courtroom. The lights were dimmed. For a moment, there was only the soft hum of the projector. Marcus took a slow, deep breath. He didn't look at the screen. He looked at Sheriff Roy Dobbs. He watched as the confident, bored expression slowly drained from the man's face, replaced by a tight, pale anxiety. The video began to play. The first image was the road, the dashboard, the peaceful drive home. The first sound was Marcus's faint, off-key humming. The entire courtroom leaned forward, captivated. The revenge was no longer a private thought. It was about to be projected for the whole world to see. The humming from the video speaker was the only sound in the courtroom, a strangely peaceful and ordinary noise that made the coming confrontation feel even more terrible. Every person in the room was frozen, their attention locked on the screen. They saw the flash of red and blue, the careful pull onto the shoulder. They heard the sheriff's drawl, the polite exchange. And then they heard it, the shift, the question about the car. "A nice car like this for a man like you? You sure about that? You ain't borrowed it from someone?" A few jurors shifted in their seats. One woman's lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. The video played on, merciless in its clarity. The lie about the taillight. The command to step out of the vehicle. The sight of Marcus, a calm and compliant man, being patted down under the hot sun while the sheriff's hand rested on his gun. The camera angle from the dashboard captured all. The absolute power on one side and the utter powerlessness on the other. It was a silent movie of injustice, with a soundtrack of polite, devastating dialogue. Marcus did not watch the screen. He watched the jury. He saw the dawning understanding on their faces, the flickers of anger and discomfort. He saw one man glance at Sheriff Dobbs with a look of pure disgust. But most of all, he watched Roy Dobbs himself. The sheriff's confident posture had melted away. He sat slumped in his chair, his face ashen. He stared at the screen as if watching his own ghost. A muscle in his jaw twitched violently. He looked small suddenly, the uniform seeming to hang off him, a costume that had lost its power. His lawyers had stopped taking notes. They just stared at the table in front of them, knowing there was no coming back from this. The video ended with the sheriff's cruiser driving away, leaving Marcus standing alone. The screen went black. For a long moment, the courtroom was utterly silent. The silence was heavier, more profound than any noise could have been. The judge finally spoke, her voice soft but clear in the hush. The exhibit is entered. You may proceed, Ms. Vance. Eleanor Vance stood. She did not need to say anything. The video had spoken for her. She simply looked at the jury for a long, 10-second count, letting the images settle in their minds. Then she turned to the defense table. Your witness, she said quietly to the sheriff's lawyer. The lawyer stood, looking defeated before he even began. He had to try. Sheriff Dobbs, he started, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. Can you explain your rationale for the stop? Dobbs cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud. He leaned into the microphone. As I said, I believe the tail light was out. It was a traffic safety issue. And the questions about the vehicle, were they part of a routine inquiry? I was just making conversation. Trying to be friendly, Dobbs said, but the words sounded hollow and ridiculous after what everyone had just seen and heard. The lawyer nodded weakly and sat down. He knew it was over. Eleanor Vance stood for her cross-examination. She walked slowly to the stand, her heels clicking on the floor. She stood before Sheriff Dobbs, not saying a word, just letting him sweat under her gaze. Sheriff Dobbs, she began, her tone conversational, almost friendly. You stated under oath that you stopped Mr. Jones because of a broken taillight. Is that correct? Yes, ma'am. And is it also true that after the stop, you never issued a citation or even a written warning for this broken taillight? I used my discretion. I let him off with a verbal warning. How very generous, Eleanor said, her voice dry as dust. She picked up a remote. Let's watch the very end of the video again, shall we? She played the final 30 seconds. The video showed the sheriff walking back to his car. The camera, still running, captured the rear of Marcus's car. Both tail lights glowed a bright, unwavering red. Eleanor paused the video on this image. The two perfect red lights filled the screen. She didn't say anything. She just let the jury look at them. She let Dobbs look at them. Sheriff, she said, turning back to him, would you point out for the jury the broken tail light? Dobbs stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He had no words. His face was slick with sweat. It must have fixed itself, he stammered, a desperate, pathetic attempt at a joke. Nobody laughed. The air in the room was cold with contempt. Eleanor let the silence hang again. She walked closer to the stand. The question about the car, Sheriff. A nice car for a man like you. What exactly did you mean by a man like you? I didn't mean anything by it, Dobbs mumbled, looking down at his hands. You didn't? What kind of man did you think Mr. Jones was? I don't know. Just a man. A black man? Eleanor's question was like a pin dropping in the silence. Dobbs's head jerked up. That had nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with it. Eleanor's voice remained calm, but it grew sharper like a surgeon's scalpel. You stopped him for a violation that did not exist. You interrogated him about whether he owned his own car. You ordered him out of his vehicle and performed a pat-down search without any legal justification. And you're asking this jury to believe that the color of his skin had nothing to do with it. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned her back on him and walked to her seat. No further questions. The defense had nothing. They rested their case. The closing arguments were a formality. The defense lawyer mumbled something about tough jobs and honest mistakes. Eleanor Vance was brief and powerful. She pointed at the screen, now dark. "The truth is not in his words," she said to the jury, her voice low and compelling. "The truth is in that video. The truth is in the 2 working taillights. The truth is in the humiliation of an innocent man. Your job is not hard today. Your job is to see the truth that is right in front of you and to deliver justice." The jury was out for less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were serious. They did not look at Sheriff Dobbs. The foreman handed the verdict to the bailiff, who gave it to the judge. She read it, her expression unchanging, and handed it back. "Mr. Foreman," the judge said, "has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor." The paper was read aloud. The jury found in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Jones, on all counts. They found that Sheriff Roy Dobbs had violated his civil rights. They awarded Marcus damages for emotional distress. The amount was significant, but to Marcus, the number was just a figure on a paper. It wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. The judge thanked the jury and dismissed them. The courtroom began to empty. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. Sheriff Dobbs stood up, his movements slow and stiff like an old man's. He did not look at anyone. He simply walked out of the courtroom, a broken figure in a powerful uniform, followed by his silent lawyers. His career, his reputation were finished. The video would follow him forever. Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Eleanor Vance. She didn't smile. She just gave a small, firm nod. It was done. Marcus walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. The air felt different, cleaner, lighter. He took a deep breath. He saw a few reporters waiting on the steps, but they kept a respectful distance. He saw his car waiting in the lot. He walked towards it, his steps steady. He got in, started the engine, and pulled out onto the road toward home. He drove the speed limit, his hands at 10 and 2. He glanced in his rearview mirror. The past was behind him, settled and finished. The road ahead was clear. He had not shouted. He had not fought. He had simply shown the truth. And the truth, presented calmly and without anger, had done all the work for him. It was the sweetest, quietest revenge imaginable. He was finally going home.